off the back of the Nottingham Forest game, the words like shameful, pathetic, shambolic were used. We talked about Liverpool and perhaps selling the star player, but there's lots of cause for optimism. For Arsenal, doesn't feel like that, does it?
Well, let's start with the sort of the vaguely optimistic elements. I thought there was Ainsley Maitland-Niles. I think he's a player of genuine substance. Okay, he's playing out of position at left back, but I think he could blossom into a good central midfielder. You look at Reece Nelson, probably slightly out of position against Forest yesterday, but again, you know, there are some good players there. But I thought yesterday was a disgrace. And
might it make sense to play him in their position? Do you know what I mean? Some of those young lads, when you're talking about, you're going to...
In a game such as this, where you can put them in.
If you're playing them, and they are good, at least if you're going to put them in...
It's almost like judging the players in mitigating circumstances.
Yeah, but he's still doing
well.
Well,
let's see him in his proper position.
Well, that's why I was even more impressed with Maitland-Niles. As a kid, sort of almost learning on the job at left back. So no, it was. You know, you looked at those Arsenal fans, sort of 5,000 fans who went there, who love the FA Cup. I'm not an Arsenal fan, but I completely share their frustration at what, you know, and it's not just them. You know, there've been a few weakened teams all over the FA Cup, but the mistake and the unforgivable mistake, and I was amazed such an experienced manager made it, even with the Carabao Cup against Chelsea coming up, that he made this, which was such a rookie mistake, was to have no reserves of quality on the bench. I mean, the Arsenal fans, you could just see them on sort of social media. They were looking at the team and they were going, OK, it's a much changed team, but there's still 633 Premier League appearances in there. OK, a lot of them was Theo Walcott, who's just completely faded off the scale in terms of influence and ability, and it's sad to see. But you just looked at the bench, and you know, a lot of the Arsenal fans were saying, "Well, okay, we've heard of some of these, but this is, you know, where is the Red Adair coming off the bench to rescue us if it goes wrong?" And their attitude on the pitch was wrong as well. You could see that, and Forest were absolutely terrific. Unfortunately, we always focus on the sort of the Premier League downfall, whereas what Gary Bazil and the players did there. But you just looked at Mertesacker. I'm a big Mertesacker man. I think he's one of the most impressive individuals that you can meet in football. You know, he won the World Cup. He's one of the few leaders they've got at the club, which is very short of leaders from top to bottom. He's a very impressive individual, but he shouldn't be playing up against an 18-year-old in Brereton, who's obviously had a good year with England, who's trying to make his name at Forest, who was being played out of position for some of the season, and now he's come inside, and he was going to see this moment, and he absolutely humiliated Mertesacker. And Wenger sat there in the stand, and it was quite interesting. You looked at some of the Arsenal people who were there. David O'Leary, you know, one of Arsenal's great defenders, great servant to the club. Pat Rice, one of Arsenal's greatest ever defenders, he was sitting there. Jens Lehmann, who might be slightly mad, but he was a competitor. He was a winner. He wouldn't have stood for the lack of communication, the lack of concentration, the lack of marking in that defence. Martin Keown was there. I think he was sort of pitch side, and the Forest fans were chanting, "Keown, what's the score?" I'll tell you what the score would have been if Keown had been in that defence. He would have made sure that players weren't getting free runs like they did for the first, like Lee Hyde did for the first. Tony Adams was there as well. You know, leaders like that. And this is, look, it's a cultural problem at Arsenal, which everyone knows. They have effectively an absentee, coming back to your point about the Americans. We've got Kroenke, who doesn't really seem to have any affinity with fans. Silent Stan, he never communicates with them directly. There is no leadership there. We're seeing it with the fading days of Arsene Wenger. How many natural captains are there on the pitch there? I know I'm not harking back to the Tony Adams era, the Frank McClintock era, things like that.
It's hard not to, with the pillars that they built that club.
There are very few, and I know maybe it's a society thing, maybe it's a general thing in football. There aren't so many leaders now, but Arsenal have so few. You've also got two. I mean, you would know this far better than I would. How do you let two of your best assets run their contracts down as an Alexis Sanchez are doing?
No, but what's ironic is
it happens all the time.
It's the two best.
Not just those two.
Oh,
they've done it with Van Persie, Fabregas.
Yeah.
Look. The reason the investigation into Arsenal Football Club is there is because the results aren't on the pitch. That would be fair to say. Yeah. Now, we know what Wenger did, and we know the good players and teams he's produced in the past, but it's the past. So for the last, 5-6 years, they've struggled. And the FA Cup's kept him in a job, really. But
fourth place has kept him in a job.
Yes, from a financial point of view, yeah. But in terms of the fans lifting that silverware, especially last season, was a get-out, wasn't it? Now, all I see is a team, and year on, year out, who don't get coached very well and don't look well balanced. And defensively are generally against better opposition all over the place. Now, that isn't that difficult to change, but you have to change the coach or the coaches under him, which he won't let happen. Now, because of the way Arsenal Football Club is set up, that's not going to happen until he decides he wants it to happen.
That's the key point.
Yes,
that's
but
the
if,
key
but,
governance
but if
point.
that did happen, I know it's a big...
Tell me another company in the world where...
There can't be, can there? I agree with
But
you.
that must be a dangerous precedent that's been set there in the evolution of Arsenal.
But
a man can have that much power.
Let me just finish on that. Or if they do change the coach and they defend better and recruit a little bit better and still play that nice football and compete, then the questions about the ownership and don't happen, do they?
Danny,
So-
I'll ask you a question. A simple question that I think gets to the heart of the issue. If, in this order, Pep Guardiola, Jose Mourinho or Antonio Conte had gone to Arsenal rather than the clubs they went to, or Jurgen Klopp, do we think Arsenal would be scrapping for 4th, 5th, 6th, or do we think they would be competing to win the title? I think they'd be competing to win the title.
I think they'd be better than where they are, that's for sure.
And any one of those would have improved them massively. And the reason they would have improved them is that managers of that ilk, we were talking about Klopp earlier, won't take that and look at what Conte's doing at Chelsea today and Jose complaining about only having Pogba et al. Is part of that change of regime would have been, by definition, a change of approach to the transfer market. We all know the history. I have said many times with Henry, we were joking about it, 6-7 years ago, what that guy achieved for Arsenal Football Club.
Incredible.
In a consistent qualification, and the 25 million quid that came with that consistent qualification, with no net spend for 10 years while they paid for a stadium, was totally extraordinary, incredible, and there will and should be a statue outside. But he became wedded to the virtues of parsimony and buying players for not much money and just refusing to be sucked in to big money transfers. He's actually done 2 big money transfers ever. Alexis Sanchez, about 30 million quid. Ozil, about 44 million quid.
So, Christian, has he worked his way into that, or has the structure allowed that monster to be created?
He's created the structure.
The club. He precedes. It's simple. He precedes the ownership. He precedes the chief executive.
He helped appoint the chief executive.
He interviewed the chief executive.
Which must be tremendously unique within world football.
There is no one there at the club and almost on the pitch who will challenge Wenger. You've got
he
Steve
decides
Bold.
when he You're right, Danny.
You've got Steve Bold, who's one of Arsenal's best ever defenders. Why isn't he allowed to influence and train them and drill them?
Why does he sit there and do it then? Because he's just getting mullered. I mean,
even those 2 players, we just talked about this too. The 2 stars, rather than being what we all thought and hoped that were the change of approach, the beginning of a new approach, where Arsenal, sitting in London in a magnificent stadium, swimming in TV money, would compete with United, Chelsea, City for the world stars, we thought there was a change of direction. They turned out to be isolated incidents that have backfired terribly. Those players now agitating to leave, contracts run down. They're not even going to make money on them.
Yeah, I mean, it's
unbelievable.
in mitigation to Gazidis, I'm not a huge fan of, but he is now trying to work behind the scenes to appoint people.
I've seen that.
Which is absolutely they need. So they have a proper structure there in terms of negotiating contracts, so you don't get this crazy scenario of players running down their contracts. So they're actually doing recruitment. So they're actually, and harking back to the David Dean era, when David Dean would say, I can get you a Vieira or a Thierry Henry or an Anelka, I can actually move quickly and do this deal, because Wenger is a ditherer. And that has cost them so many times, individuals that they could have got. Arsenal could have a fantastic team of players who Wenger was interested in fairly early. Kante, individuals like that, Yaya Toure, Zlatan Ibrahimovic. Zlatan famously saying, going down to the training ground, well, I don't do trials.
He also never digs anyone out. I spoke to some really big Arsenal players, played with him a long time, and said that he never, ever digged anyone out.
He's a great.
It's a non-confrontational culture.
Times have changed where you have to.
Absolutely.